their experiences, and then we try and find a way of how we can analyse that and put all that together. So as much as we heard from, was almost 800 people, I'm also interested in your stories, what happened during COVID. Also, I'd like to say, and I guess respect, if people had a difficult time during COVID, and this conversation raises any concerns for you, I'm happy for you to maybe stand at the back and have a chat with someone rather than just kind of sit through it. So to start with, I'd like to talk to you. Yes. So,
I feel like I'm at the boarding chair.
No, not at all, not at all. So last night I was thinking, how is this research relevant to you? As much as it's relevant to all drivers and what's happening on the roads at the moment, I think there's another aspect to it where it can be important. So this lovely lady told me about something that she does with her drivers in regards to identifying people that may be driving erratically on the road. Would you mind sharing that with everyone?
Yep.
Thank you.
Was that about the people being intoxicated?
Yes.
Okay. So I usually have a conversation with my students about other drivers and how to assess what they're doing. So usually I start explaining to them that Stoner Stan isn't going to be doing things very quickly. Okay, he's more interested in getting home, sitting on the couch and eating his chips. Okay, so he's just going to, he might do a bit of weaving, but you know, he's not doing anything erratic. But we'll pick him out, we should be able to spot him. Okay, so we're talking about that end of the scale, C-class drugs, usually downers. Then we're going to talk about the other end of the scale. We're going to talk about meth head max. Now meth head max, he goes pretty quick. Okay, he's pretty erratic, he's not giving it a lot of thought, but he will stand out. And he should stand out. So if we're all driving along, it's about advanced awareness. We shouldn't be waiting for meth head max to get to us. We should have spotted meth head max. So it's about helping them identify what that other person is doing and seeing that early. Parents don't really have those conversations as blunt as that. But we do have, sometimes I've talked about that in other presentations, and people in the room have said, what gives you the right to say, oh, that guy's stoned, or you know, that guy's on P or whatever. And I'm like, well, I have actually got some qualifications about recognising drug use in workplaces and a big list of other stuff. So I feel that I am entitled to pick it out if I think that's what it is. It's also my business, it's my car generally, and you know, it's going to have an impact. The other thing is other people or the student. You want to talk about that?
No, go ahead.
If I think the student's intoxicated, hasn't happened very often, but some people feel, I mean, there doesn't need to be conflict. You know, you can address that yourself, and it can be as simple as, oh, hey, it's Friday afternoon, I'm not really in the mood for this. I don't think you are either. Should we just call it quits and reschedule? Yeah, I'm just not letting those people in my car, but I think it's important that we have those conversations with our students about recognising what other people are up to. Yeah, and we should have it earlier rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So that's where I saw the relevance of what happened during COVID. And what happened during COVID is everybody had a very different experience. And how this relates to you is, I think it's important to talk to your learner drivers or whoever it is in the car with you about what's happening around them, like what their context is. I'm also a big believer in pointing out who's doing what right. So there's definitely the positive side to that. So I just don't want you to think that I want you to identify the negative on the roads. So the impact of COVID. So first thing, it was about health. And we had different experiences around health. For some people, it was a direct effect. So some people caught COVID. Some people's family members had COVID. And some people may have just had the fear, but not the experience. Home life changed. Some of you who had kids that were at school, suddenly your kids were there 24/7. So that was a big change for you as well. So there's some of the behaviours that changed. Mental health, nearly missed one. So some people really suffered by being in lockdown and not having social connections. That affected their mental health. And then driving behaviours. So we saw a lot of media start to come through in the early months of COVID, talking about especially extreme speeding behaviours on the road. So we have this model, it is called the ecological model, so I've adapted a bit just to explain it in a very simple way. So we say that there's different influences on people's behaviours. This can be driving behaviours, but I'm just going to talk behaviours in general. So you have individual factors that affect how you behave. So stress, loneliness, that type of thing will influence how you behave. Relationships, so your connection with others. We know young people behave in different ways because of the influence of their peers. So that's just one example. Then we have external factors. So during COVID, we had restrictions and travel bans that influenced our behaviour. Then there's the cultural context. So we belong to different cultures. We belong to the Australian culture. And there was a big thing during COVID around drinking. Australia is known for social drinking culture, and that was definitely impacted. And historical events will influence your behaviour. And now COVID-19 pandemic is a historical event that we are thinking has impacted our driving behaviours on the road until today. I'm not going to talk the statistics, so I'm glad that earlier it was raised that road crash fatalities are actually slowly increasing, and we're not achieving those goals that we have set out to, where we're trying to aim towards 0 fatalities and serious injuries. So what do we know about risky driving during 2020? So actually we drove less overall. There was reduced traffic on the roads, and generally there was a decrease in crashes in that early part of 2020. I'm from Queensland. We behaved terribly in 2020. In comparison to other states, we were horrific. And especially when we looked at the drink driving and speeding fatal crashes, there were increases over 2019 of up to 35%. When you take into account that there were less people on the road, people were driving less, there were travel bans, we were locked down, that's a horrendous increase. Our police resources were stressed, so we sent our road policing to the borders to do border control. So we had less police on the road, and at the time, it's a pretty logical decision because there were supposed to be less people on the roads. Then RBT, I'll tell you the story of Queensland. The large roadside, big scale RBTs were suspended suddenly. It was announced by police in the media. So there were a lot of comments about whether or not that should have happened. But the fact is, police were still out there. You could have been pulled over. You still could have been tested for drink driving. And what we know now in Queensland is that road policing has never returned to pre-COVID levels. So there's all these changes that suddenly we're wondering, are some of these things influencing what's happening on the roads today? So the aim of the study that I did in 2020 and this qualitative storytelling data that I want to share with you today, so the aim of that was to understand drivers' thoughts and experiences during COVID and how did this impact their driving behaviours. So yes, surveys, we conducted 3 surveys. So the first survey was in response to the RBT suspension. So we jumped on board pretty quickly, and then we needed to change as COVID and all the restrictions and the reopening of things changed, we changed our survey. So we ended up running 3 separate surveys. And as I said before, these qualitative kind of storytelling, we heard from just under 800 people. And so what did we find? Okay, so this is something we often do with this qualitative data, is we develop word clouds. So what this means is the bigger the word, that's the topic that people were talking about more often in their stories. So this is phase 1, so early days of lockdown and just after they suspended RBT. People were talking about alcohol and home. So this may resonate with you. Lots of people talking about who's drinking, who's at home, what are we doing? Are we getting on Zoom, having drinking parties? This was common in conversation. So phase 2, this is about 2 months into COVID. Now people are starting to talk about police. So we'll give you that context of the survey. So the questions people were being asked was about driving behaviours, was about the suspension of RBT, was a lot about drink driving. So this wasn't a surprise to us, but it was just interesting that took until phase 2 where they were talking more about police and what police were doing. And then phase 3, so this is where we started to come out of lockdowns in Queensland. So people were still just talking about COVID-19 in general and the restrictions that they had been through already. Okay, so what was said, so this is where we get into the really juicy stuff of what people were talking about. So in italics of what comes up, this is what people were actually saying. So people talked about their own driving. So people were saying that they were less concerned about speeding and using their phone because they did identify that there were fewer police on the road. Some people claimed that they were less careful because there were less people out, a bit more freedom. Some people talked about this unintentional or accidental speeding. So on open roads sometimes when there's not a lot of people around, not paying attention to your speed, it can creep up. Yeah, next one. We had people talk about engaging in risk just because. No reason, just because. So someone said, I was less cautious and more cavalier. And then another, pushed the limits more than usual. Other people had reduced tolerance on the roads. So someone said, the more I was asked to stay at home, ... they had a lot to say. You don't want to hear what they had to say, and ... End of what they said. More likely was when I was driving, I was tempted to yell out at people wearing masks. You can imagine what was on the ... And then also reduced tolerance in regards to people had an increased road rage for people who were being slow on the roads. Stress. So someone told us that they worked in a hospital and they were stressed from their work. They admitted to this accidental or unintentional speeding. They felt that there were bigger problems in the world than their accidental speeding. So I think things like this start to build this picture of potentially, was there a change in mindset in 2020 about the way people drove? Of course, we talked about other people's behaviours. We're really good at this. So people said they saw an increase in erratic driving. People were concerned about the speed that other people were driving. Stupid driving behaviours. But also identifying that some people did change for the better in regards to their driving. Next one. And this is what some people said, where because of others, they actually improved their driving. So they were keeping an eye on their speed more closely, they were more cautious. I'm not saying that cautious is always equivalent to safe. Staying to the speed limit because they're more aware of what other drivers are doing. Traffic had improved, so I was a calmer driver. Someone said that they felt less anxious, again because the roads were quieter. And someone, I don't rush anymore with the flexible working arrangements. Again, no pressure or rush to be driving fast. Yes, there was a preference to drive over public transport. So the fear of catching COVID by going on public transport was a thing, so people were tending to drive more. And learner drivers. It was really nice to hear from some learner drivers. I think the last comment is probably from a provisional driver, but there were issues with not having anyone to teach them during COVID. But then for others, they did have that person that they need to supervise them at home more often, and they felt that it was easier to learn on the roads because the roads were quieter. And then with the last one, they actually felt more nervous. So I'm assuming this comment came as we were opening up. Yeah, so they were out of practice. They hadn't been out driving much, so they were more nervous and observing that other drivers were less focused. So what does this all mean? So COVID impacted all of us very differently. I'm sure everyone in this room has their own story and what they experienced during COVID. And then with the changes and the lockdowns and everything that happened, we all reacted differently. And not everything was a direct reaction to health and the virus. And actually for many people, their driving behaviours didn't change, except that they did less driving. So at the moment, we are doing a follow-up study to what we did in 2020, and we want to understand if what those stories told us is still impacting the way people drive now. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
So you want us to scan that?
Yes. I will not, yes, okay, it's a warning. It's a tedious survey. It takes about half an hour. Initially we had said 20 to 25 minutes. We've been told by participants it will take you half an hour. But we need to understand before, during and after COVID. So you will get that repetitiveness of questions as you work through the survey. But we really need this data. We want to be able to get the numbers to make interstate comparisons. So I think it's really important to especially see differences between Victoria, where there were really strong lockdowns, and WA, where there wasn't so much at all. So we are getting there with numbers, but yeah, every little bit more will be helpful. Is that it? That's it. That's it. Any questions or any stories to share?
It's not really a question for Natalie, but Natalie has asked the association on occasions to pass on surveys that she's doing. It's really, really important when we send these out, you do fill them out, and so she can continue the study, so we can continue to invite her down each year, and her boss will let her come down because we've always contributed to what she's working on.
Thank you.
And so for us as driving instructors, you want this all from our learners?
Both. So this particular study, it's everyone. As long as you're Australian, so probably not learner drivers now, because we asked questions about their driving in 2019. So they had to have had some type of licence from 2019.
You've got someone on repeats that you taught, and you see them, you'll be sick.
Yeah.
Are you happy for us to send them on to our New Zealand colleagues to put some info in for you, just as a comparison, or just to waste your time?
Probably because we haven't, from the beginning, planned to include New Zealand.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to waste their time because we probably wouldn't get the numbers now. So, but this,
I'll see it anyway.
yeah, we've left the survey open until the end of the year, and of course, there's a prize draw that you can enter. So, a little bit of an incentive to participate.
So do you think people are driving differently now than what they were pre-COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah? What's the gut normally to you?
A lot of the drivers have lost their skills, and a lot of them are a lot more aggressive, particularly here in Sydney.
while I'm walking towards you, I always have wondered as well that during 2020, red P-platers didn't have their driving experience on the reduced risks that we have graduated licensing for. So.
Being country area, we've just found tradies. Tradies are driving erratically, like
Not just country.
Isn't it great? Good to know. Good to know. Thought it was just us. But yeah, absolutely. The young tradies who would have got their licence on absolutely no traffic at all because they were essential services and going in to get a licence and doing a 5-minute drive because there was no traffic, and now green P-platers, fully licensed tradies and in utes driving.
And with this survey, I still have these kind of open-ended boxes where you can type in your thoughts and impressions. And as I said, there's a lot of repetitive questions because of the information that we need. You can skip any question you like. We can still use your data. And if you just want to go in and type up something, that would be great too.
That's probably the first thing, is the increased level of aggression and impatience on the road. But I know for me personally, it's actually changed my training. I have become more patient and tolerant because when COVID locked down, I had my own opinions on whether our industry should be shut down. And I had to have a good look at myself as to how I viewed the instructors that were still working, because I realised I don't know everybody's individual circumstances. And the more I looked at that, I then looked at people on the road and started thinking, I don't know their circumstances. I don't know why they're driving aggressively or impatiently or whatever. And so I've now found that I'm able to put more of that in my training and start talking to people about, yeah, that guy's driving like a moron, but we don't know why. And what we can do is try and accommodate his driving with our own driving, not be judgmental of why he's driving that way, but let's just make allowances for the fact that he is. And so it has made a change to me personally in my own teaching.
All tradies are on meth. All tradies are on meth. Range of danger.
And I have spoken to quite a few of you, and a number of you talk about that first question of getting to know the learner, so just getting one piece of information about them. And I mean, if there's a subtle way to ask it, but maybe their experience during COVID, you can help them to understand other drivers on the road. Someone back here? No? No.
When are you expecting the questionnaire to be, feedback from the questionnaire to be done?
Oh, end of the year.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, it's open until 31st of December.
Okay. Yep,
Yeah.
fabulous. Well, can we give a clap?
Do I have time to self-promote?
Yes, absolutely.
No, it's not. It's a recruitment, but I really want to hear from driving instructors. New Zealand as well would be great. So we talked about competency-based licensing very briefly yesterday, and I'm doing a study with the ACT government at the moment, and we're looking at all the competencies we believe a learner driver should have before they graduate onto their P-plates. So we're doing that not just from the top of our head, but we're going through published literature, we're going through any online documents we can find, government agencies, books and things that I've come across over the years from driving instructors and driver trainers. So next step in this, so I'll compile all those competencies together, and I would really like your opinions as to whether or not we have included everything that we need, and also if you think any of those competencies are potentially too difficult, irrelevant, whatever. So what your involvement would be, if you agree, I would send that to you, and then if you can give me half an hour of your time, I'll just ask you a couple of questions over the phone or Zoom, whatever's easiest for you. So I've got a bunch of business cards I can leave up the back.
I would add, and the point was made yesterday as well, about emerging technologies in vehicles and making sure that mapped competencies, assessment tools, training programs, legislation around offences is mapped to what the emerging technologies are offering drivers. And I mean, even when you talk about the COVID stuff, there's an awful lot of technology in 23 and 24 model cars that wasn't there in 2019. So has there been a change in that as well? So if you're talking about competencies for novice drivers, they have to be across so much more technology than a cohort from 10 years ago.
Yep. So that in the list of competencies, that's where I self-cite, because I've talked about that in my work before. But what I can't get is the more detailed information of how it would actually fit into lessons and what exactly you would talk to learner drivers about. So I can only do half the job, and then I need you guys to do the other half with me.